In this video, we're going to look at chemical bonding, but we're specifically going to look at tests for anions. So our learning intention is to complete tests for anions in aqueous solutions of chloride ions, carbonate ions, hydrogen carbonate ions, phosphate ions, sulfate ions, sulfite ions, and nitrate ions. So let's look at tests for anions. It's important to know that anions are negative ions. Now, we've already looked at our cations test, and that has been by the flame test. So in our test for anions, we look at anions that are dissolved in water. So this is qualitative analysis. Now, there's 5 main anions tests that we need to know on the Leaving Cert Chemistry course. We need to test for the chloride ion, the nitrate ion, the phosphate ion, the carbonate and hydrogen carbonate ion, and the sulfate and sulfite ion. Now, when you're studying for this, you don't need to know the fully balanced equations for all of the tests. You only need to know the simple ionic equations for each of the tests, and these will be highlighted to you as we go along. So the first test that we're going to do is the test for the chloride ion. So the first thing that happens is the chloride ion is dissolved in deionized water. When you do this, a clear solution is obtained, and what we do next is we add a few drops of silver nitrate. Now, once the silver nitrate is added, the solution will turn cloudy as a white precipitate forms. So this white precipitate is called silver chloride, and as we can see here, we've the silver ion of the silver nitrate reacting with the chloride ion that's dissolved in the water to form our silver chloride, which is a white precipitate. The final thing to do then is to confirm that the silver chloride ion is present. And to do that, what we do is we add dilute ammonia solution, and the white precipitate will disappear if it is the chloride ion that is present. And the precipitate will disappear because the silver chloride is soluble in dilute ammonia solution. And just to point out, this is the half equation that you need to know for this test. So the second test that we're going to look at is the test for the nitrate ion. And in your test for nitrate ion, the nitrate ion is dissolved in deionized water. Then some cold, freshly prepared, saturated iron 2 sulfate solution is added to the solution to be tested. The next step would be to tilt your test tube and let a few drops of concentrated sulfuric acid run down the side of the test tube into the solution. It's important at this point that you do not mix the solution or shake the test tube. You should just let the concentrated sulfuric acid run down the side of the test tube. If the nitrate ion is present, a brown ring will form at the junction or interface of the layers of the sulfuric acid and the nitrate and iron 2 sulfate solution. So you will know that the nitrate ion is present because a brown ring will form. Now, this may take a few minutes for the brown ring to form, so patience is key. The last thing to note is that the term concentrated sulfuric acid must be used when you are discussing this experiment in an exam. There is also no half equations that you need to know for this test. The next test that we're going to look at is the test for the phosphate ion, and in this test your phosphate salt is dissolved in deionized water. The second step is to add ammonium molybdate along with a few drops of concentrated nitric acid. Once you've added all the chemicals necessary, the test tube should be placed in warm water and heated gently to a temperature not exceeding 40 to 50 degrees. A positive result for this test would be the formation of a bright yellow precipitate, and there is no half equations needed for this test either. So the next test that we're going to look at is the test for the presence of the carbonate and the hydrogen carbonate ion. So basically, to begin this test, what you must do is you must connect a test tube containing the carbonate or the hydrogen carbonate, as we can see here. It must be connected to another test tube that contains lime water. Now, in the test tube that has the carbonate and the hydrogen carbonate, we need to make sure to add some hydrochloric acid. Now, once we do this, we'll see fizzing being observed as the acid comes in contact with the carbonate or the hydrogen carbonate, and a gas will be given off through this tube into the lime water, and the lime water will turn milky. So that tells us that if the lime water is turning milky, that the gas produced is carbon dioxide. So therefore, if the lime water turns milky, it means that the carbonate or the hydrogen carbonate ions are present in the solution. And this reaction gives either two of these half equations that we have here, where the carbonate ion will react with the hydrogen ion to produce carbon dioxide and water, or the hydrogen carbonate will react with the hydrogen to produce carbon dioxide and water. So depending on whether we have the carbonate or the hydrogen carbonate in our test tube, what will be important to do is to test and find out whether it's the carbonate ion or the hydrogen carbonate ion that is present in our test tube. So to do this and to distinguish between the carbonate and the hydrogen carbonate ion, we add a solution of magnesium sulfate to our test tube containing the carbonate or the hydrogen carbonate. Now there is a distinct result here between the two that will allow us to tell the difference. So a white precipitate will appear in the test tube that has the carbonate present. So that will mean that our magnesium will react to produce magnesium carbonate, and the arrow here indicates that a white precipitate is formed. If we were to add the magnesium carbonate to the hydrogen carbonate, we would see that no white precipitate is formed, and that is even when the solution in the test tube is heated. So that gives us this half equation that we have here. Now the reason no precipitate forms when we add the magnesium sulfate to the hydrogen carbonate is because magnesium hydrogen carbonate is soluble in water. And these two equations here are necessary in an exam when you are asked to distinguish between the carbonate and the hydrogen carbonate ion. So the final test that we have to do is to test for the presence of the sulfate or sulfite ion in solution. So our sulfate and sulfite ions would be dissolved in deionized water, and we would get a clear solution. To this, we would add some barium chloride. This would cause the clear solution to turn cloudy due to the formation of a white precipitate. Now, once this white precipitate forms, we know that either the sulfite or the sulfate ions are present. So that will give these corresponding half equations. If it's the sulfate ion that's present, we'll form barium sulfate, and if it's the sulfite ion that's present, we will form barium sulfite. Now these two half equations do need to be known for the exam, but it's important that we are also able to distinguish between the sulfate and sulfite ion and know which one is formed in our reaction. So in order to do this and to distinguish between the sulfite and the sulfate ion, what we do is we add some hydrochloric acid. Now, if it's the sulfite solution that we are checking, the white precipitate that was formed in the first step with the barium chloride will dissolve. And this is because the barium sulfite is soluble in hydrochloric acid. And if the white precipitate remains, then we know that we have our sulfate solution present in our test tube, because barium sulfate is insoluble in dilute hydrochloric acid, indicating here that no reaction will occur. So this is a summary table of everything that we have discussed in this video, and this can also be found in the notes which are available on the website also. That's it for this video. Have a read over the learning intention to make sure you understand everything we've gone through.